Welcome to the Providing More podcast. I'm your host, Brent Saunders from PM Title. Negotiations in real estate is essential, and today we speak with a negotiations expert. In this episode, we're joined by best-selling author and speaker Kwame who's the director of the American Negotiation Institute and is an expert in the field of negotiation and conflict resolution. To learn how to improve your negotiation skills, let's take a listen. Kwame, thank you for joining me. I really appreciate it and really excited to get into this. You, as the owner of the American Negotiation Institute, obviously have a lot of knowledge and expertise in negotiation skills, and every study that I read and surveys of consumers show that negotiation skills are one of the top skill sets that people are looking for when they're interviewing agents. So, first kind of talk me through, how did you actually get into, the negotiation skill set and building these workshops and providing these guides?
Yeah. So the funny thing is, I got into this because I was profoundly bad at it to start off, and it came from a moment of self-awareness. This was before I became a lawyer. I realized that I was struggling with difficult conversations, and so for me, I was trying to find confidence when it came to conflict, difficult conversations. And I don't think during undergrad I had a knowledge of the term negotiation, but really that's what I was looking for. And so that's why I studied psychology. I was looking into how I could work on that in myself. And so overcoming that was a big part of the process. And then I went to Ohio State University's law school and got a Master of Public Policy. And I stumbled upon negotiation simply because it fit in my schedule. And so I took the course and it went really well. And they had a negotiation competition at OSU. And so I said, oh, let's do this. This will be a lot of fun. And so my partner and I, we worked really, really hard, and we ended up winning the competition. So that let us represent the school at regionals in Ottawa, Ontario. We won that competition as well, and then made it to the semis of nationals. And after that, I figured I really wanted to make negotiation the core of what I did, not just a tangential part of my practice, but like the core. And that's what led me to this, because for me, I believe the best things in life lie on the other side of difficult conversations. And if I'm able to show people through my journey and through my improvement that negotiation is a skill, not a talent, you can improve not just to better yourself professionally, but also to improve your life. That's really what I want to do.
So I've never actually heard of a negotiation competition. So
Yeah.
can you tell me what I've heard of, like debate and stuff like that, but I've never heard of a negotiation competition.
It's really cool, and frankly, it should be the main competition that law schools have. It's gaining in popularity, but moot court, trial advocacy, that still is thought of the traditional way of competing. But the thing is, over 95% of cases settle, so you're not going to see trial very often. And so what you do in this case, you have a fictional client, you read a scenario, and then you and your partner negotiate with another pair of aspiring attorneys, and they're representing their clients in the fictional scenario. And then judges observe it and rate you based on the outcome and your relationship that you're able to establish with the other side. And it's actually exciting. I'm working with Ohio Dominican University to put on the first ever online negotiation competition for their MBA students, because the majority of negotiations happen now over the phone or via video conference now. So we need to be able to take those practical skills and bring it online too.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. And one of the big things that I wanted to ask you about is, your TED Talk was fantastic. I really enjoyed it. A great mix of, both entertainment and education. But you talk about, one of the biggest things with negotiations is, addressing, conflict and having difficult conversations, which a lot of people don't like, right? But so one of the things I'm curious about is, how did you become comfortable? How did you practice that? And then the next step from there is, how do you do this? Is it all different, whether it be via text, via phone call, via in-person conversation? How do you build out this skill across all of these platforms that we are communicating on a daily basis?
This is fantastic. And we could have episodes based on those two questions alone. And so
Did I tee it up enough for you?
Exactly. I'm excited. So that was a like the core message of the book, my book, Nobody Will Play With Me, finding confidence in conflict. Because the thing is, it doesn't make sense to give recipes to people who are afraid to get in the kitchen. A lot of times it's not the fact that you don't have the skills per se, it's that you don't have the confidence to execute. And so for me, I think I thought about it from a psychological perspective. I need to figure out how to empower other people first and then give them the skills, build on that foundation, because that's what I did myself. And so I like to focus on cognitive behavioral therapy because that type of therapy is the strongest. And so I'm not saying, hey, the key is go get therapy. Sometimes that might be the answer, but there are steps that you can take from cognitive behavioral therapy or CBT that you can use to improve. The one that I like the most is exposure therapy. And so for me, the definition of negotiation is any conversation you have where somebody wants something. So that makes you realize that negotiations are everywhere around you, family, friends, etc. And so take these daily opportunities to flex your negotiation muscle. Instead of avoiding it or not engaging wholeheartedly, say, oh, this conversation with my spouse is an opportunity to practice this skill. This conversation with my child is an opportunity to practice this skill. Okay, somebody in the service industry made a mistake. This is an opportunity to practice this skill. And so by constantly exposing you to the stimulus, you become less afraid of it. And so that's the way that you start to build that up. So that's the answer to the first question.
And I
The
think that's
second,
great
oh
because
yeah, go ahead.
I agree with that 100%. And I think that if you the way you just framed it is you're putting yourself in a position of understanding, hey, I'm in a negotiation anytime. Like I
Yes.
said, I want something. I always think about negotiation when I think about my nephew, and I was babysitting him, and it's like, okay, Ian, it's 8 o'clock, time to go to bed. And he's like, oh, come on, Uncle Brian, can I stay up an hour? And I'm like, no, you need to go to bed. And he's like, how about 30 minutes? And like, no. And he's like, all right, how about 2 hours? And I'm like, that doesn't even make any sense. You're going the wrong way. But I love watching that and challenging him and going, okay, here are the different options. And I negotiate back and forth with him. And again, I realize that negotiation and sales are everywhere in your world. Everywhere you are, you're experiencing that. But if you don't recognize it and understand that's what you're really seeing, then you can't flex it and practice it and go, hey, I've prepared myself for the tough negotiations because I've already done all these small ones and built up to that. So I think that's great the way you framed that.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And that's the thing. I think one of the main reasons people fail in negotiations is because they have low negotiation recognition. They don't know that these negotiations are happening. And especially when you think about it in terms of real estate, we think about the negotiation as the negotiation.
Right.
There's just the negotiation over price. We're focusing on that. But I like to talk about the concept of micro
Yep.
negotiations. What are the smaller negotiations that are happening in every interaction that we're having with people in the process? And especially as realtors, one of the most important negotiations we have to have is with our clients.
Yep.
And we focus on those negotiations with opposing realtors, but we're losing the negotiation with our clients. Like we're failing to, for example, set appropriate expectations at the beginning. And if you miss that negotiation, that hidden negotiation, then you're running into a situation where even if you perform to the highest level of your abilities, you can still get dinged by your client for not performing well enough because you didn't meet their expectations.
Yeah, and I think that's great, and I agree that that's definitely something that I have seen and heard from agents. Because again, yeah, they got to negotiate with their client on the front end. Hey, what do you want to actually list this for? And the person says $1 million, and it's like, well, it's only $100,000 house. You now are in a negotiation and becoming better at those skills of that micro negotiation you talk about is something that I think is overlooked in the industry. And again, I think that I actually like calling it a negotiation as opposed to sales, right? Instead of selling them something, you're negotiating with them, because I think negotiation is more of a two-way street term, whereas sales is a one-way street. I'm trying to sell you something, not we're negotiating, right? So it's I versus we. And so have you worked with many realtors before in terms of how to work on both sides of the aisle in terms of negotiating with clients and negotiating with contracts?
Yeah. So a couple of weeks ago, I was in New York doing a negotiation workshop for realtors at a real estate shop called Compass. And
Oh yeah, Compass is huge.
yeah, just a small shop. But it was a lot of fun working with them because a lot of them didn't recognize the importance of these negotiations that they were having day to day with clients. And when you start to really break down what these negotiations are, the majority the majority of the negotiations that you're having are not the big obvious negotiations that you're going to read in those typical negotiation books. Yeah, those are going to be important. Maximizing the value for your client is going to be of vital importance, but you also have to have those little negotiations too. So I do those types of negotiation workshops, and then I have some people that I've worked with one on one for some of the deals that they have been working on, and so deals with specific properties, but also deals where it's a business type of opportunity. Now I'm going to take me and my team. We're going to move to a different shop, or we're going to work with this developer for a larger project. Those are slightly different negotiation skills. I mean, the fundamentals of persuasion and psychology are going to remain the same, but there are going to be some different dynamics too. And so I've had the opportunity to work with realtors on both.
Yeah, and that's actually a really interesting point is, yeah, brokerages are negotiating when they're bringing agents onto their team, and how can they get better at negotiation skills. So when you first go into a workshop, what is kind of the very first thing you go, okay, this is what we need to do? Are you testing people to see where their current skills are at in the path? Or, I mean, what is your first step when you do these workshops?
The first step is trying to rethink the way that they approach negotiation, because I think there's a lot of unlearning that needs to happen. So we don't think about it in a very rigid type of way, and that's why every workshop I do starts off with a slide that simply says, "What is negotiation?" And so I go based on the pace of the folks in the room. What do you want to talk about? It's a kind of control your content type of presentation, really. So I think I went in with 160 slides, and we spent for this all day workshop. We spent an hour on slide one.
Wow.
What is negotiation? Just a discussion on that. And so just thinking about that, these are high level negotiators in a very, very competitive location, and we're having a deep, robust discussion on what is negotiation, because we're getting to a point where we're thinking about it in a completely different way, and then we can build from there.
And sorry, I may have missed this. Is this New York City?
New York City. Yep,
okay.
Manhattan.
Yep. I knew I heard New York, but I wasn't sure if it was actually New York City. So obviously that's a very different market than Columbus, where we are and everything. So what was the biggest thing that they needed to work on when you finally got into what is negotiation and started actually working with them?
Yeah. So the biggest thing and I think this goes for all negotiators really, is managing emotions. Because here's the thing, we can talk about there's textbooks and textbooks written on the highest level negotiation strategies. Like you have anchoring, you can talk about contingency deals, all of these different things, right? But the thing is, I feel as though the majority of negotiators, high level negotiators, fail long before we even get to implement these strategies at a high level, because they're not doing a great job of framing the conversation or managing emotions. And if we go into these conversations and the emotions of the other side, or I mean, our emotions too, can be out of whack. When people are in a situation where they're making emotional decisions, and then we try to implement these persuasive strategies that are based in large part in large logic and people thinking clearly, there's going to be a disconnect. And so these conversations become a lot more difficult than they need to be. And going back to the example with the negotiation workshop in New York, the way that I in my head scheduled for this to go through, I planned on us going through what is negotiation, a little bit of an overview on psychology, and then talking about managing difficult emotions using the compassionate curiosity framework. That was going to be the first half. That was the whole day.
Wow.
We didn't even get deeper than that, because people were continually asking questions, going deeper, trying to learn more. Because really, I mean, if you get through the emotion side of it, I mean, the negotiation almost handles itself beyond that. Things become a lot easier. The other parts almost are become perfunctory in many ways. And so I think there's a kind of a lack of, I call it negotiation hygiene, where people are so focused on acquiring these higher level skills that they forget the fundamentals. And so that's where I like to start it. And then after everybody's on board with that, then we start to layer some really exciting higher level techniques.
So, and obviously I realize that this, you're unpacking a lot right here, right? And talking about this and everything. I mean, you've got the podcast, you've got your TED Talk, you've got a best-selling book, right? So you've got a lot of content, and then your workshops themselves. But so I realize that we're not going to get through nearly as much as I'd like to. But you just used the phrase compassionate curiosity.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't. What does that mean? What do you mean compassionate curiosity?
Yeah. So first of all,
Do you see how I use compassionate curiosity to ask the question?
I like it. That was good. That was very good. Yeah. So it is a really, really simple approach to dealing with difficult conversations, whether it's at home or at work. It is a framework that can be applied as is in all of your conversations in life. And I look at it as the foundation of the majority of negotiations. You work through the emotion side, and then you can build on that. And so it's a simple 3-part framework. And it's simple because most likely, if you are in a difficult conversation, you're tense, cortisol, the stressful hormone is flowing through your body, you're not thinking clearly. So I want to give people something they'll actually remember. So the first step is acknowledge and validate emotions. Second step is get curious with compassion. And the third step is joint problem solving. Really simple, just those 3 steps: acknowledge emotions, get curious with compassion, and then joint problem solving.
So, kind of walk me through. Let's just kind of pretend that, hey, you're a realtor and you're negotiating. We're talking about the price of what I'm going to sell my house for. So using that 3-step process, what is the first thing that hey, I want to sell my house for $1 million, and you think it's only worth 100,000. Walk me through what you then do.
Yep. Perfect. So first of all, just taking it back and putting my psychology nerd glasses on. That was my undergrad degree, and I love it. So what's happening there when somebody values their property at so much level that's so much higher? It's called the endowment effect, where when you own something, you value it higher than the market would. It's an emotional response because it matters more to you than it does to other people. So people aren't thinking clearly. So people think about economics in terms of numbers. Economics mostly in large part is about emotions. That's why we have the field of behavioral economics, blending psych and emotions. So that's the first thing. And so when it comes to the first step of the process, it's acknowledging emotions, even if the emotions aren't obvious. And so whenever there's the hint of emotionality, it's a signal that you use this framework. And so they might calmly tell you $1 million, but you recognize, oh, that's an emotional thing. Sounded logical. That's emotional. So you reflect those emotions by saying things like "it sounds like" or "it seems like." And so it sounds like you really enjoyed your time at the house. Can you tell me about your experiences there? So you're getting people to walk down memory lane. Okay. Yeah. So it means a lot to you, right? Yeah. Okay, good. So as you start to acknowledge those emotions, it helps people to start to think through them, to overcome them. It's a limbic response. The amygdala is at play here. By acknowledging the emotion, it helps the amygdala start to quiet down. Now we move to compassionate curiosity. We know that questions are more persuasive than statements. And so what we do is we put the term compassion there as a way to moderate your tone, because sometimes you sound like a jerk and you don't know it. And that's why even when you think you're sounding normal, somebody might accuse you of yelling at them, even though you don't feel like you are. And so you would ask a couple questions. So what's your goal with the house? Okay, you want to sell the house. And what's your goal as far as the price? Well, I think it's $1 million. Okay, great. So I understand you think it's $1 million. And I'm assuming, hypothetically, we want to get the best possible price we can for the market, right? Okay, good. So how are you valuing the house? Now we're getting a little bit more specific. Okay, so I'm valuing the house based on blah, blah, blah. All right. And so based on your understanding of the market, where does that rank in the market? What are the other comps and stuff like that? So you're asking the questions. You're setting up those questions in a way that gives them the opportunity to persuade themselves. And so once you feel as though you've gathered enough information through compassionate curiosity, then you switch to joint problem solving. So great. So let's think about what we can do to come up with a strategy based on what we talked about. What do you think makes the most sense? Okay, blah, blah, blah. And so through this, you're managing their expectations. You're coming up with a strategy that they agree upon, that they agree with. And when that happens, then there's a higher rate of compliance on the back end. And so you can continue to touch base throughout the process. But this is a really easy example of how you can use the framework.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. And again, I totally get, and I've seen where, those situations will work, where instead of me just telling you the answer, getting you to tell me and ask those questions, and allow people to think through for themselves, as opposed to just saying, well, no, it's not, worth $1 million, right? Get them to figure it out for themselves by asking those questions. And hey, how did you value it? Where, what comps are you using? And so I think that's really, really smart. And again, I love it. Now, my question is, I always want to know, so then going to the next step in negotiating contracts, and dealing with, say you're dealing with another agent, we're all salespeople, and I think we all know we're salespeople. So one of the sales tactics is ask the other person a question, right? Make them answer you and tell you stuff first. So what if you go up against another negotiator and just keeps reflecting back and asking you questions every time you try to get them to answer yours?
Yes, I love this. I love this question. This is one of my favorite questions. So here's the thing. If you're going up against another negotiator who is asking a lot of questions and you realize they're highly skilled, first of all, we often interpret that as a threat. But I think it's an opportunity, because now at least you recognize you're most likely going to be having a conversation with somebody who is not afraid to share information. And so there's going to be more information in general on the table, which puts you in a better position to be more creative and get the best deal. That's the first thing. The second thing is, when it comes to controlling the conversation, you're spot on. We control the conversation by asking questions. That's because for instance, I'm talking more than you. You're controlling the conversation. You're the host. You're guiding me, right? And so what you want to do is end your statement by an open-ended question. Right. So I'm not going to preach evasion here. I don't think that's really helpful, especially when it comes to building rapport. But you answer the question, but you are always focused on ending what it is that you're saying with an open-ended question on your own, because it's all about who's reacting to whom. That I think about it in terms of chess. I love playing chess. The initiative. The initiative is the person who has the initiative is the person who is leading the dance, who's responding to whom. And so you get them to respond by asking questions. So once they ask their questions and they're doing a great job of it, you want to be intentional about responding slowly so you can catch up and mentally and come up with a high level question. And this is not easy to do on the fly. And so that's why we have on the website, American Negotiation Institute, you can get .com, you can get a free guide. So a free guide that allows you to download up to 18 guides, 18 total guides. So business negotiation guide, car negotiation guide, introvert negotiation guide, just a ridiculous amount of guides that you can download. And a major part of that is create a list of 10 open-ended questions that you can utilize during the conversation. Because it's tough to come up with that on the fly. So you want to be prepared.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I always try to talk to people about, is to ask open-ended questions. So often, again, going to a little bit different scenario, is somebody's holding an open house and a couple walks through the door, right? So now we know as a realtor that they know that, hey, I want to get something from this person, right? What do you want to get? A name or a phone number, so that way you can build them into your pipeline and reach out to them and try to secure them as clients. But what I see time and time again is the first question people will ask is, do you have an agent? That's not an open-ended question, right? Yes, I have an agent, and now I've been shut down. I can't interact and can't continue to negotiate with them to go, okay, here's how I can be your agent. Asking an open-ended question, what's the name of the person you're working with? Asking those types of questions are going to be much harder, and people are going to be much more likely to say, oh, I don't have one. Great. Now you've taken one step closer to going, okay, now I can negotiate for that contact, so that way I can follow up with them, put them in the pipeline, and again, work them through the process. So I think, a guide that has open-ended questions, that you can learn and kind of script yourself in the negotiation, I think is a fantastic idea. Actually, the noise you just heard was my email popping up, where I went on to your website and actually put my name in there, so I'll be able to download the actual guides later today. So that's a great tool, I think, to help. And again, sounds like it's definitely a great way to start down this path of becoming a better negotiator.
Absolutely.
What are there certain personality types that are better negotiators?
I would say yes and no.
Okay.
So coming out, I guess this is another bit of a shameless plug here. I'm working with LinkedIn to put on a course on personality, how you can lead based on people's personalities. And I think the same applies when it comes to negotiations too. There are different personality types, each with pros and cons. And different personality types tend to shine in different areas of the negotiation. So it's not that there's necessarily a personality type that's better. I think there's a personality type that is more willing to engage in conversations, difficult conversations. That's the first one. And the other thing is there are personality types where you just have to be mindful of where you're strong and where you're not so strong. So let's actually break this down. So for instance, somebody who you think about agreeableness, the level of positivity that you feel toward other people. If you are high in agreeableness, this is going to be great for you at the beginning of negotiations, where you're talking about building rapport, generating collaborative ideas, brainstorming, being creative, those type of things. You're going to be incredibly good at that part of the negotiation. So expanding the pie, for another to use another term of art there. But then when it comes to the transactional side, when it comes to dividing the pie, that same agreeable person is going to find it difficult to be successful, because their natural inclination is to want to be liked by other people. So agreeable people are generally well liked, but they also like to be liked, which makes them more likely to be people pleasers. Ooh, Brent didn't like that offer, I'm going to stand down. Right. So somebody who is lower in agreeableness, so a disagreeable person, is going to be great at the transactional side, because they don't care if they like you, Brett. They don't care about, they don't care at all. But the thing is, they're going to struggle at the beginning when it comes to opening up the conversation. So it's really important to be self-aware of where you're strong, where you're weak, and then really focus more of your energy at that portion. It's not that a disagreeable person cannot be nice. They can play nice, and it just takes a lot more work. So they need to be mindful of the way that they're coming off to other people, make those adjustments, and then they can be more natural when the conversation gets more difficult, as an example.
So do you start out, do you do any type of like personality testing? Do you use DISC? Do you use, Colby? Do you use any type of personality test to learn, hey, who am I as a person?
Honestly, I should with my clients. I really should. I like to focus on the big five personality traits. And so I kind of do it based on what they tell me, and build something off of that. But I think for their level of self-awareness would be helpful. And I like StrengthsFinder is great, for example, because it doesn't just give you one option. It gives you, hey, this is your top one, but then here are the next few that work for you. That's fantastic. The majority of personality psychology researchers focus on the big five personality traits. So openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And so you can be on a scale of high to low, low to high, and then you're not just getting an assessment of one specific trait, like, oh, you're an extrovert. Well, I mean, what else? Everybody is a little bit of something.
Right.
And so you have to figure out where you are on all five, and figure out what the blend is, because the blend is really where you get some clarity. Because an extrovert who is high in agreeableness is going to be very different from an extrovert who is low in agreeableness. Even though that extroversion is still at the high level, it's going to be moderated or affected by the other combinations.
That's very interesting. I kind of just thought of it just because you were talking about the LinkedIn that you're working on, and we did, now not for personality types, we did with our upper management team, we did Colby for what's your leadership style, to better understand what your leadership style is, and then basically, we fed what our leadership style is and preferences to our team, and said, hey, here's how I operate as a leader. Here's how we're going to be the best team possible. And it definitely was something that was eye-opening for me, because I didn't know who I really was in the grand scheme of things in terms of a leader, and I learned a lot from doing that. And then since then, I've done 5 different type of personality tests and everything, to see, like, on different platforms, like, is it the same on every platform, or was that just a mistake? And I'm pretty consistent. So, but it's pretty interesting. I get nerd out on stuff like that, and then start going to seek out, like, hey, what else is out there, and what are people using? Because, like I said, so there are so many options out there, and what does everybody like, and learn from the most.
Great. Yeah, that makes sense.
So to go back to your negotiation guides, I know we talked a little bit about scripting and having these open-ended questions that are kind of in your back pocket. Do they work exactly the same? Like I said, in person versus via text message? Do you need to change the way you negotiate and communicate, depending on if it's through a text message versus a phone call?
Well, let's start with the preparation. The preparation will essentially look the same. The only difference at the end of the prep is going to be determining which medium is going to be most beneficial. One of the simple rules of thumb I like to follow is the more emotional, as in terms of negative emotions that people are experiencing during the conversation, the more personal the contact needs to be. So we're moving from email to phone call to video chat to in person, right? That's so because it's all about data points. Because you can read any tone into a text message or an email message, but I want to give them more data points so they can see my facial expression, they can see the tone, they can see the body language and recognize, oh, Kwame is not being threatening right now. He's asking a question. So that's my rule of thumb. But one of the things that I like, a really, I don't want to call it a hack because I think that minimizes.
Yeah, that phrase is overused, but it still sometimes is a hack.
It is a helpful tip. Yeah, I'll say is I like to get people's phone numbers if I have the opportunity, if I'm trying to work with them, and then I'll send them like a quick text, and it doesn't even need to be anything meaningful. Just, hey, it was great chatting with you, something like that, or ask a quick question, something like that. I'm not overusing it. I mean, I might text them one time, but if that. But the reason I like to send one text is because the people who generally text you are friends. They're closer relationships. So I think the fact that they can look and see a text message type of relationship, even though it's very, very, very brief, it makes them think, oh, Kwame's just not a guy I'm doing business with. Oh, Kwame's a friend. And that starts to build up some trust. But I use text message very sparingly if the conversation is important.
That's interesting. And I think that's great. Yeah, I agree that, like you said, that text message feels more intimate and personal for some reason. And that's just a personal, feeling. And I don't know why I feel that way because in the grand scheme of things, it's the same as an email. But I'm like, ugh, email. No, this is too business, right? If I get a text from somebody, I'm like, oh, they know me, right? We're friends. So I think that's an interesting observation that I really didn't think about before.
Yeah.
What is the most difficult thing that most people experience with negotiations?
I would say it's emotion. It's dealing with the
Okay.
emotion, and it's different levels. So dealing with fear and anxiety leading up to the conversation. There's that tension that you have coming into the negotiation. During the negotiation, something might surprise you. Surprise is an emotion that you might feel. During the negotiation, it might be frustration, annoyance, anger. That's something that you need to manage. After the conversation, it might be regret because emotion decisions are made mainly or in large part on emotions. The problem is that once the emotion fades, the decision remains, and if it's a bad decision, then you feel regret. And so it's going to be the spectrum of emotions that you can feel before, during, and after the negotiation. That's what people talk about when they're afraid of negotiation. When you actually hear what they're saying, the biggest issue is it's not even about the substance; it's about the emotions around it.
Yeah, and that's one of my favorite sales authors talks about emotion and says that people buy an emotion and then justify on logic. It's one of my
Exactly.
favorite phrasings ever, and understanding that in the sales cycle, both when you're going to buy something, but also when you're selling yourself to somebody else, is understand, hey, they're going to buy an emotion and justify on logic afterwards. And I think that's really important to understand. So what was the hardest thing that you experienced when you finally decided, when you were like, hey, I'm a people pleaser, I know that I'm a people pleaser and I'm not strong in negotiations, I need to get better?
hmm
What was your biggest hurdle? Was it the same thing?
Yeah, I mean, it was recognizing that there's no easy way around it. You kind of have to go through it, and that's really what exposure therapy is. When you think about exposure therapy, it was designed for people with phobias. Like you, I'm afraid of spiders. Well, through this therapy, you're going to be seeing a heck of a lot of spiders, right? And so it was changing the habit. I think about it in terms of a negotiation habit. So you have the cue, like the stimulus, the specific thing, the behavior, then the reward. So the habit that I had was a habit of avoidance. I see a difficult conversation. That's the signal, the cue. My behavior is avoidance, and then the reward is that I didn't have to do something that was scary or difficult. Even though that there's great stuff on the other side of it, I didn't do that, so it felt good in the moment. So I had to change it. So the signal, same thing, a difficult conversation, the action, engaging, and then the reward was the satisfaction knowing that I'm casting a vote in favor of the man I want to be. And so the thing is, I had to move from the fear of failure to the fear of regret. So 10 years down the line, looking back on this conversation, would I respect myself more if I actually engaged, or would I respect myself more if I ran away from it? Okay, yeah, I'm having this conversation because I don't want that future version of myself to be disappointed in me.
I think it's a great way to put it in terms of thinking about your future self and how are they going to think about what decision you made. Can you tell me a story about your worst negotiation and the biggest mistake you've made when negotiating?
Yeah, man, let's think. I think it would actually be one of my mediations. It was a mediation. And it was just I got too comfortable. And I got sloppy. Thankfully, the outcome did not change as a result. It was just poor form. And so I've had hundreds of mediations, and it was with a mediator that I was really familiar with. Sorry, it was with an attorney. I was the mediator. An attorney I was really familiar with. The deal was about to get signed, and everything. And we were talking about one of the terms, and the party on the other side, they recognized that they didn't have any leverage in the situation. It was like you could either lose now and have some control over the loss, or you can lose later and make your life could be really bad. So they made an agreement now, and we're just reviewing the terms of the contract, and they went over the interest rate, and the interest rate was just so high. And when the guy read off the interest rate, just going through summarizing the deal, I said, "Whew." He's like, "Hey, no comments," and I was like, "Sorry, that's my fault." The problem was the conversation. We knew we got through the toughest part, and we were just finalizing things that people were going to sign, and so I got a little bit too relaxed off my game. So thankfully, it didn't have a negative impact, but it was just poor form in the moment.
And I think that's again a great lesson for people to learn is that it's very easy to get complacent, and you need to always frame it as okay, hey, here's what I'm doing, and make sure you're being cognizant of the situation and you don't get lax in what you're doing. So I think that's great. What about your best negotiation that you've ever had?
Yeah, and quick thing about that, the last point too. If you talk to a negotiation expert who doesn't have a good answer for that, it's like that's a kind of a red flag, because if you don't have any major L's on your record, you haven't been playing the game.
You're not trying, or you're not pushing hard enough, right?
Exactly. So that's one thing. Major wins, I tell you. I'll just go ahead and lean into my recency bias here. So I had one of my clients reached out to me yesterday, and she wrote me this incredibly long email. I screenshotted it. I didn't have time, but I'm going to put it on my wall. It was good. And so it wasn't even necessarily that she got what she wanted yet, because we're still in the middle of a really tense, deep negotiation. But I walked her through the preparation. She did the preparation guide. We did some role playing and things like that. And she was really nervous about the conversation. And she held her own against somebody who had a lot more experience, a lot of leverage and things like that, well known within their industry. And she didn't feel like he was respecting her at all. And so I walked her through it, and she said, yeah, we talked for 75 minutes. I held my own. And I was not intimidated. I asked my questions, and I had my responses ready for if he didn't answer them appropriately and everything like that. It felt fantastic. I can't tell you how good I felt during the negotiation and how good I feel now knowing that I performed so well. So I appreciate that. And that meant a lot to me, because I knew where she was emotionally beforehand and where her confidence level was. And then just in 2 sessions leading up to that major conversation, she was a completely different person. And so it doesn't take much to turn these things around. If you know what it is that you need to change, and if you have somebody helping you to guide you through it.
And this may be a dumb question, but I'm not afraid to ask dumb questions. prior to, meeting you and getting to talk about, American Negotiation Institute, I never heard of negotiation experts. So how big is this field? Is it a large field? Did you kind of help build it from the beginning? Just kind of teach me a little bit about the industry.
Yeah, so it's a small field. It's a small field. So you have, I would say the majority of us are in academia. So business schools, law schools, things like that. I mean, I teach at an MBA program. I teach at Otterbein and I teach at OSU's law school as well. And so that's a big place to find them. But you're seeing a few pop up in terms of training organizations and consultants, and many people blend the two. I'm a blend of both, but it is very niche, which is really interesting. Everybody negotiates. I mean, if you happen to interact with a human being at any point, you're negotiating, right?
Absolutely.
And so it's incredible to me how small the industry is. And so one of the things that I want to do is help to expand the industry, even if it's not me specifically doing the work. I don't. I'm not I don't have that scarcity mentality where I'm afraid, oh no, they're going to get the business. Listen, there's enough for us to go around. Um, I think about some of the clients that I've had, very large clients doing incredibly big deals, government organizations where the major thing that they do is negotiate. And people who bring me in, they say, Kwame, I negotiate all the time. I never had negotiation training. The only trainings I've received are through your podcast and reading your book. And my team doesn't have any negotiation training at all, but we're negotiating multi-million-dollar deals, hundreds of millions of dollars, but we are not trained. I'm like, are you serious? And so I really want to help to build the industry, and I think the podcast helps, and helping people to recognize that they're negotiating all the time helps. But right now, it's very, very, very niche.
And what's the name of the podcast, and where can I listen to it?
Yeah, so it's Negotiate Anything. It's the top ranked negotiation podcast in the world, and we're on every single podcasting platform.
And then what about your book? Where can I find that and purchase that?
Yeah, that is on Amazon exclusively. Audiobook coming out later than it should be, but probably sometime this year. And it's called Nobody Will Play With Me: How to Find Confidence in Conflict.
Awesome. Well, I think that's about all the time we've got. I really appreciate it. It was fantastic learning from you. I can't wait to get into your, my downloadable guides on negotiation that I just got from you.
Fantastic, Brent. I appreciate it. This was fun. And yeah, let me know when you want to do it again. I'm down.
Awesome.